We're glad to have you join us this morning. And my name is Marcia Getting, and I'm Family Economics Specialist with MSU Extension. And you've had a chance to hear from Emily, who is the Fergus Petroleum County Extension Agent, and she is co-hosting and doing some of the teaching that we have in this series. And the reason we ask you for location is so we can add more stars up to give you an idea of those that are participating across the state. And we even have some out-of-staters, and we welcome you as well because they know people who are located in Montana, and some of those are relatives. And for this session, we would like to extend a special welcome to our new AARP participants. AARP Montana has joined a partnership to make more of this information out there. So my very first question is, did you register for Tuesday Tips through AARP? So you simply can indicate to us yes or no. And then we'll know how many of you are present with us today. Okay, Emily, I think that's a pretty fast one, so we can take a look and see what the results are here. All right, we see that we do have about 15% of you, 4 of you, that registered through AARP, and that's great. And then we still have quite a few that don't have an answer, and we hope that at some point you'll figure out how to use our polls, because that makes it more exciting for you, I hope. Just a reminder that if you have questions, you need to write those questions in the chat panel so that Emily and I can remain in the WebEx room for another 30 minutes after the session and try to answer any questions that you have. Those of you that are new, I wanted to share that I like to use an audience enhancement tool. And one of those are the polls, and the second is to use wildflower names as triggers for remembering some of the information that's out there. For example, you may look at this flower and say, my goodness, what is that? Well, it's a steer's head. And the steer's head helps me remember that I want to steer you towards your consideration of whether or not you're going to gift while you're alive, or are you going to give a bequest after you're gone? Now, this is a Botswana heart plant, and some of you have seen it before, and what its real name is, I don't know, but you can see those little hearts that are there. So what I want to do is ask you a question: why would you gift while you were alive? So just think about that for a second and share in the chat room. What's a good reason that you might want to gift to some of your children, grandchildren, or maybe even friends while you were alive? And then what we're going to do is have Emily share some of those with us so we can see why some of us are gifting. Well, while you're doing that, I will give you some things that I've heard people talk about at some of my meetings. Some people say, hey, this is just a way that I can express my love and affection for my family members. Others have said, I want to give children the opportunity to participate in our family business. And this would be something like a farm or a ranch or a downtown business where you're starting to gift shares of that particular business. And then I've got grandparents, and grandparents are saying, why I want to gift is I want to be able to have my grandchildren obtain a college education or further their education. And then I just had a call the other day from a lady that was wanting to know, could she use her Montana Medical Care Savings Account to pay some of the medical expenses for her daughter who happens to live in Wyoming. And I was able to say, yep, that does qualify for the MSA. And then I had one gentleman, he said, you know, I want to watch my children enjoy the benefit of what I can give them now instead of waiting until after I'm gone. So those are all reasons that people have to gift. Emily, what were some examples that some of our participants mentioned?
Yeah, so we have a few different people who said, so you can see them enjoy it, so you can see their happiness. We have a couple that said to keep family from fighting after you're gone, so maybe cut down on some of those arguments. A couple people said reduce the possibility for taxes, lower resources for federal financial aid, considering how FAFSA counts parents until child is 25, because then you have control of when and how much to gift, and you can modify that at any time. Maybe because the person you're planning to give to needs the money now. Yeah, lots of really great answers here.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for sharing. But let's take a look at the opposite side. And what are some reasons that you're waiting until you pass away, and then what you're going to do is leave a gift, but we call it a bequest at that time. So what might be some reasons that you've decided, I'm going to wait until I'm gone? Well, as you're thinking about that, I also came up with some ideas of my thing with that too, of, well, why should I wait until I pass away? Well, one concern might be, what if we will we have enough money during retirement? So I kind of want to keep hold of it because I might need it during my retirement days. And then long-term care expenses. You know, a lot of us have watched our parents who wound up in a nursing home because of Alzheimer's or some reason like that, and we want to have enough money to pay those bills so that we can have a nice place that we're staying. And I've had some grandparents say if they're in fear of spoiling the kids, or the grandkids. They don't think it's appropriate that they get the money now. It should be later. And then I had one just share, I worked hard all my life. I lived through the Depression. I lived through World War II. And I just don't want this younger generation wasting away my money. Okay, Emily, how about examples why people may not want a gift now?
Okay, so there's quite a few who said, I might need the money. I'm not sure how much money I'll need. Somebody said, in considering blended families, this might be a way to make sure my money goes where I want it to go and not against my wishes. I won't have to listen to others criticize my choice of the gift receiver.
That's a great one.
My kids aren't fiscally responsible yet, and they're also worried that recipients would be liable for taxes. So those are some of the things.
Okay, well, we're going to examine some of those kinds of issues, but my reflection from the heart plant is, it's something we all have the opportunity to decide. And maybe we'll do a combination of both of those approaches. Maybe we'll decide some little gifts now. And I had one lady do that. We sat down and visited, and what she wanted to do was see how her grandchildren would utilize the gift, because that would give her ideas for later. Now, what I have here is a golden prickly pear or a bronze. And different parts of the state have different names for it. But Emily, what about some of these rules to family members that if we're going to give a gift during lifetime, I bet there's a rule or two out there.
Definitely. So I think you'll have to move.
All right. Sorry.
I know, it's complicated. Okay, so first we need to talk about what the definition of a gift is. So the IRS defines a gift as the transfer of property from one individual to another, while the gifter receives nothing or less than the full value in return. So what does this mean in real life? So for example, we've gotten this question before. Let's say you sell 500 acres of land that's valued at $1 million to your son for just $1 per acre. And some people say, well, that's not a gift, right? Because I sold it to him. But really what that means is you've made a gift of $999,500 because he paid you that much less than what the fair market value was. Or another example, let's say that you place a home in joint tenancy with right of survivorship with your daughter. That home is worth $350,000. Now, the IRS would say that you have made a gift of half the value, or $175,000, to your daughter. So there are some ways that we can gift, and it can be it can fall under that annual gifting rule. So I think this increases almost every year, doesn't it, Marcia?
Well, actually, people think that, but it's going up by the Consumer Price Index,
Okay.
and they're not going to raise it until it reaches $1,000.
Okay.
So right now we're still at $15,000.
Okay. So for 2020, the annual gift limit is $15,000, but that $15,000 can be given to as many different people as you wish. So you could give away $60,000, but if you gave it to 4 different people, you would fall under that annual gift limit, and that gift would be tax-free. There's also an opportunity to do gift splitting. So if your spouse joined with you in that gift, you could actually give $30,000 to an individual before you hit that limit. Another thing to keep in mind with the IRS is that you can provide an unlimited amount of financial support for medical costs, and that doesn't fall under that $15,000 rule. The one thing to keep in mind is that you should always be writing the check to the provider. That way it gives you a better paper trail. You can prove that you did pay for medical costs, not just give somebody a gift of $60,000. Another thing to keep in mind is that you can also provide an unlimited amount of money for tuition payments if you pay those directly to the educational organization. So if you have a grandkid, a niece, a nephew, or anybody else that you'd like to help pay for college, you can do that in an unlimited amount as long as you are paying it directly to the educational organization.
Okay, well, and you got to keep in mind that your recipient doesn't pay an income tax on the amount that they receive. Now, I've always had grandparents that are concerned about this because they say, oh, my grandson is so smart and he's a computer expert, and if I give him that money, he'll just lose the whole thing in taxes. No, you give that grandson $15,000. That's his. The only difference it makes to you is you don't get to take $15,000 off your income, but technically if you were, let's say, had a certificate of deposit and you earned about this much last year, well, that wouldn't be income to you anymore because now that $15,000 is with your grandson. So let's say that I win the lottery and I decide that I'm going to give $100,000 to Emily. Now, don't jump up and down real quick, Emily, because I haven't won the lottery yet. But there's no income tax to her. There is no income tax reduction for me either. And I, as the donor then, I need to file the IRS gift tax form that's called 709 to make that gift to Emily if I want to be really legitimate. So this is the grandma that I was telling you about. What she did was make a gift to her granddaughter and grandsons. And I want to show you from a health and tax perspective what happens with this $15,000 because of what the granddaughter did. The granddaughter then wrote Grandma a thank you note. Very good, handwritten, not emailed. And she said, Grandma, thank you very, very much for the $15,000 that you gave me. I want to share with you what I did with the money. So what she said is, Grandma, I opened an MSA for myself, and an MSA is a Montana Medical Care Savings Account. We're going to have a session about that in June. She also opened an MSA for her husband with $4,000. Then she decided to take $5,000 of that at $15,000 and put in an individual retirement account. And at this point in time, this granddaughter had never owned a home. So therefore, she could set aside another $2,000, and voila, all the $15,000 has been used up. So of course, Grandma is really impressed that her granddaughter did these really financially astute things with the money. But you see, the granddaughter did one more step. In the last paragraph of the thank you note to Grandma, she says, Grandma, I want you to know that as a result of the way that I used the gift that you gave us, my husband and I were able to save another $2,319 in federal income tax and Montana income tax. And it was the way she used the money. If she had just taken that $15,000, went and bought a car, there would have been no income tax savings. But because the family had income, the husband and wife, they could take that $4,000 off their income for the MSA, another $4,000 for the MSA, and then also the IRA and the first-time home buyer account. So this was super in Grandma's opinion. Now, notice I said she gave the money to a grandson, the grandsons, and the granddaughter. Now, what do you think that she's going to do for the granddaughter next year? Well, when I ask this question to my audiences, they say, oh, she's probably going to give her more next year. Well, that would be great. But then I tell them the bad news. Guess what about those two grandsons? They never acknowledged the gift. They never wrote Grandma a thank you note. And that lady, she let me know. She called me up and said, now I know. And that's what she was after. So that was a backhanded compliment, I think, to the granddaughter. And Grandma was really thrilled with her. So my reflection from the bronze prickly pear is that grandparents can utilize the gifting tool and express some of their generosity while they're alive. It gives them the opportunity to see, are our grandchildren financially fiscal managers, so to speak. Now here you see a white flower, and this happens to be an albino fairy slipper. And this is the first one I've ever seen, and I was so excited because this is what the fairy slipper looked like normally. And of course, I had to work it into my presentation, so guess what? We're going to examine the difference in asset basis. You see, when we're gifting, we've got other considerations to think about, and I want to share the difference between dying and gifting. Or in other words, we're going to gift, so what are the potential consequences? So, of course, I'm using the name Albino, and this is Grandpa Albino, who has ranch land. And he paid $200 per acre in the year 1970. So it cost him $50,000. So I'm using simple figures here for us to keep track of what's going on. So let's say that what Grandpa decides to do is he's got a grandson that's very, very interested in doing some ranching. So what Grandpa does is gift the land to his grandson this year. And it's now worth $6 million. Don't you think that grandkid's excited? So our question is, does Grandpa Albino have to pay a federal gift tax on the gift that he made to his grandson? So this is a simple one, yes or no. Does Grandpa have to dole out dollars to pay the gift tax?
As you're answering that question, don't forget to hit submit too. I know sometimes you have to scroll down to get to it, but make sure you hit that button.
So let's see what you thought. So we've got 29% saying no, or I'm sorry, yes. We've got 32% that said no. And then we've got about a third of you that didn't make a response to that one because maybe you're in a situation where you can't. Well, let's take a look at that. The answer is yes, the gift is subject to the gift tax, but in reality, Grandpa Albino doesn't have to pay because this year, 2020, you can have $11,580,000 and you can gift that much out that's taxable. So if you're giving more than $15,000 and like my $100,000 to Emily, I would have had $85,000 that was technically subject to the tax, but I wouldn't have had to write out a check for that. So that is what we call the exclusion amount for the federal gift tax. Married couple is double that. So quickly, I think I'm getting out of my league here when you talk about $23,160,000 for a married couple. Can't even imagine having that much money. But let's take a look then. What is the grandson's basis in this gifted property that Grandpa gifted to him? Is it the $50,000 that he paid for the land? Is it the $6 million, the fair market value at the date Grandpa gave the gift? Or is it the difference between the two that becomes the basis? And we'll see how important that basis is pretty soon. And notice I didn't put in a category, I have no idea. I like to have you guess because you might stand a chance of getting it right. What's our response, Emily? What are people thinking? Okay, we have the majority of people thinking that it's the $5,950,000, in other words, the difference. But in actuality, the basis is the donor's basis. So when you gift, when you put a house in joint tenancy with someone, you are technically gifting that amount, and that's the basis that they have. So in this case, the grandson's basis is $50,000, just like Grandpa's was. Well, hey, let's say Albino grandson decides to sell it at that $6 million. Well, when we go through the capital gain calculation, what we discover is, oh my, this grandson now has a gain of $5,950,000 because we subtract out the basis. And I calculated the tax for that, just making some assumptions, of course. And I found, the grandson owes a capital gain, or what we would call a tax, upon the sale of this land of $1,600,550. And do you think grandson is happy about that? No, I think everybody would have said, don't sell, don't sell. But he wanted to do that. So now let's look at the difference if Grandpa Albino had waited until he passed away and then left the land as a bequest to his grandson. So we look at the same situation, what the land was worth and Grandpa's basis in the year 1970, but his basis, and we're just assuming he didn't make any improvements in the land, what we've got is a fair market value of $6 million at his death, because that was appraised of the land and we know it's worth that much. Well, in a written will, Grandpa said he leaves this land to his grandson, and we're going to see what happens then. So now I want you to tell me the value that is subject to the federal estate tax. Is it the $50,000 that Grandpa paid? Is it the $6 million that Grandpa has as a fair market value upon his death? Or is that the difference between the two? So tell me by clicking one of those answers in your poll, and don't forget, hit the submit button as well. What is the value that's subject to the federal estate tax? Okay, Emily, let's see what people are saying. Okay, we've got 23% that thought it was the $50,000. We've got 28% that say it is the $6 million. And then we still had 18% that thought it was the difference between the two. And what happens then when you pass away is any property that you own, whether it's a home, a famous Charlie Russell painting. What happens is the value is stepped up to the fair market value at the date of death. So we know that when Grandpa died, it was $11 million. So does Grandpa Albino's estate have to pay a federal estate tax? So Emily, you've got it up there, and I bet all of you are going to get this one right. Right? So check yes or no and hit the submit button and feel great that you know the right answer. But see, I'm just testing to see if you were paying attention. Okay, Emily, I'm sure they've got all the responses in. What do we got here? Okay, most of you, 46% are saying no, but we do have 13% that said yes. Now, that was truly a trick question, because remember that figure I told you before, 5,580,000? So the way the IRS does it is they say the 6 million is subject to the federal estate tax, but technically nothing is going to be required, because you can pass 11,580,000 this year and not have a federal estate tax. And again, we double that for folks that are married. So we've got 23,160,000 that could be available to you to pass on to the next generation and no tax. So let's take a look at this federal estate tax. I have a lot of concern that people have. What percent of Montanans' deceased persons' estates paid a federal estate tax in 2019? Sometimes we hear about this in the newspaper. Every now and then there's a letter to the editor about the awfulness of the federal estate tax. So what percent end up paying it? 100, 65, 45, 24%, or is it less than 1%? Don't forget to hit the submit button. Okay, Emily, what do we got for responses on this question? Okay, 46% of you, yay, you got that right. Indeed, it is. It's less than 1% end up paying a federal estate tax. Now, how about Kirk? The grandson inherited the $6 million ranch. Does he have to pay a Montana inheritance tax on the $6 million that he inherits? And this is a simple yes or no. Just click one or the other and hit the submit button. Okay, Emily, I'm running out of time as I watch the clock, so let's shut this one down and see what people think. Ah, 15% said yes. We had 38% that said no. And in actuality, no. We have not had an inheritance tax in Montana since 2001. So it doesn't matter who you leave your property to. Montana is not going to have a tax on that. So we've had that available now for quite a few years. Now, let's look at the basis of the grandson. He's inherited property at $6 million from grandfather. What is his basis in that property? So what are our choices? 50,000, 6 million, or 5,950,000. Okay, Emily, what do we got as a response? Okay, we're kind of across the board there, but the majority of you did get it right at 6 million. So that's what happens when somebody passes away. We have this step up in basis. So that means the grandson's basis now is 6 million in the property. It's not like it was when it was gifted to him, where he had $50,000 as a basis. So we can take a look at that and maybe make some advice to the grandfather as far as thinking about it. So if he sells it for $6 million in 2020, there is no capital gain, no tax. So look at that. Wow. The cost of selling a gifted asset was $1,600,550. An inherited asset was $0. So think about this when you're looking at a home, because it's the same thing. A home gets a step up in basis, and if your kids sell it at the fair market value at the date of death, there is no capital gain there. There is no federal estate tax, no Montana inheritance tax. So receiving a step up in basis in appreciated property, stocks, bonds, and some of those, is an advantage to the people that are going to inherit it. So keep that in mind. In this case, we learned that the grandson is really better off if he inherits that property than gifting the property. Now, that's looking at it from an economic standpoint. Maybe grandpa just wants to give that property to the grandson, and that's fine too. It's whatever your goals are for your particular family situation. So as I look at the fairy flipper, nope, this is the lady flipper. Once again, that 30 minutes has gone by very quickly. If you don't have a memory like this elephant's head, we now have 44 extension MONT guides. These are fact sheets that provide you additional information on all the topics that we're discussing, and one of those is gifting. And these are also available at your local county extension office, such as Emily's there in Fergus County. Now, Tuesday Tips next week, we will invite you to join us because we're going to be talking about powers of attorney. And we're going to be looking at financial as well as our recently released for the state of Montana healthcare power of attorney. And during this period of the COVID-19 virus, a healthcare power of attorney is a very good idea. And Emily and I want to extend appreciation to you for your participation in our Tuesday Tips. And I'll stop sharing so that she can finish off and do some thoughts about evaluation so that you have a chance to tell us what you thought of today's session.
Yeah, so I just opened a poll that should be up on your screen that just asks you to share some of your thoughts with us. What did you learn? Do you have any suggestions? There's also the first question asks you if you would like to receive reminders about these Tuesday tips. Your email address, you just type that in right there and you'll get a reminder every Monday about the next day's Tuesday tips. Your email will not be shared with anybody outside of our Tuesday tips team, so don't worry about that. And that'll stay open for a few minutes, so feel free to take your time answering. But in the meantime, we'll start with some of our questions that have come up. So the first one is somebody asking, what is the Montana look back in terms of assets?
Okay, maybe you could clarify this in the chat box. Are you talking about the look back period if you gift and you're going into a nursing home and you want to qualify for Medicaid? Because if so, that we have a look back period of 5 years, and that's a federal law, not a state. In other words, if Montana is going to accept Medicaid payments, we have to follow the federal rules for that. So I've heard people trying to convince me this year that it's been changed to 7. And no, it's still a 5-year look back period.
Okay. Someone this might be just a comment, somebody wanted to share that long-term care costs thousands of dollars a month, even for assisted livings and nursing homes, or even more. The long-term care insurance and Medicare covered some, but their father paid about a third out of pocket, and that was a lot. So I'm not sure. I mean, yeah.
Yes, thank you for sharing that information, because that's one of those concerns we have about giving away everything is, my goodness, the average cost of nursing home care in Montana is over $6,000 a month. And, you sit down and you pencil that out. And yes, even if you have, like this person was saying, long-term care insurance, it doesn't cover it all. And so I'm hoping through time that more of us will consider that we need to prepare for long-term care costs with all of us living longer, just like we prepare for retirement, that we want to have that money. Because quite frankly, I've got a friend on Medicaid. She's sharing a room. It's very small, no privacy, and private pay people can have their own room. Makes a big difference.
Okay. We had that person who asked the question about the look-back period chime in and said, yes, you answered their question. Another one that came up was in reference to the granddaughter who was gifted the $15,000 from her grandmother, and she put it into MSAs and a first-time home buyer. They asked, should the granddaughter in that situation have put some of that money in a Roth IRA?
Oh, yeah. She could have decided that she wanted to do that, because you see, with a Roth IRA, the interest that you earn, especially being a young person, whoa, you get to keep that interest. It's tax-free. Whereas by putting it in a traditional one, it lowers her income now, but she's going to have to pay on it when she pulls it out. So, yeah, at that time, even though I was using 2020, the real situation was Roths weren't available then. Now they are, and the recommendation for young folks, Emily, put your money in a Roth so that you get all that built up interest tax-free.
Okay. Another one, if a husband and wife want to gift $30,000 to their child, do they have to be as two separate $15,000 gifts or as a single gift, and how do we record that gift?
Okay, you can do both. You can each write a check, but when you've got a couple like that that's making a gift, you need to go and fill out that gift tax return. Now, that's your proof that you gave $15,000, and the spouse is giving permission if you go ahead and just make one check for $30,000. You've got a record of what that was because you filed, was it the 709 return? But just if I got my numbers mixed up, the 706 is the federal estate tax, and the 709 is the gift tax.
Okay. Another question, you mentioned joint tenancy with right of survivorship. Does the spouse named then have to pay tax on half value of the property as a survivor?
Oh, excellent question, because I didn't clarify that. This happens in the case where you're putting your grandkids' names or your daughter or your son, but marital couples have an unlimited marital deduction. So they can go back and forth as much as they want, and there's no problem there, as that's one of the benefits, I guess you could say, of getting married. So if you want to have more, get married.
Okay. Another question, if you were the grandfather in the example you gave, would you do a transfer on death deed to transfer the property to the grandson, or would you just name him in the will?
I would say it depends on what your goals are. You know, you're definitely aware of a transfer on death deed, and as such, you know that doesn't have to go through probate. So that would be a good example to give. If you have a will, you maybe are wanting to be a little more secret about it, because you see, if you do a transfer on death deed, that's a matter of public record. If you write a will, it's not a matter of, quotes, public record until you die, because it doesn't become effective until you die, and then it's submitted for probate. But if you have a transfer on death deed, you have payable on death designations, you've taken care of everything through these beneficiary designations, then your will may not even have to be probated, because everything is taken care of in a non-probate fashion.
Okay. On something on a similar note, somebody asked if a transfer on death deed is still a better option than gifting a home. I think that might be close to the same lines as what we just talked about. But if you have more to say about that.
Yeah, we've got, maybe I've been saying this for 2 months, but we've got a transfer on death deed mock guide that's going to be available soon. And I'm very excited about having it because we're going to be able to explain this new law that we have in Montana. It's very similar to the beneficiary deeds that we had, but it allows you to avoid probate on that $6 million. And it used to be probate was figured on a percentage of the value that went through. The legislature changed that to a reasonable fee. So that would be a question if you're a personal representative handling an estate. You need to ask the attorney, what is their definition of a reasonable fee for handling a probate?
Okay. Another one that came up, let me find it. Would it be better, okay, I think maybe this is similar to the same one. Would it be better to transfer a property to my son with a TOD than gift it to him now? Would he have to pay taxes on the property with a TOD?
That's a good question because you're thinking it's the way that you transfer it that makes the difference. No, by a will or a TOD and you're deceased, you get the step up in basis. But if you gift it while you're alive, your son assumes the basis that you have in the house. So if he sells it after you pass away, he is going to have a capital gain that is your basis plus whatever the fair market value is when you died. I see a lot of people are getting the wrong information from the coffee club about what you need to do is put your property in the name of your kids, and that is just a good thing to do. You need to consider the total consequences. So before you do something like that, visit with your attorney, visit with your accountant to make sure that you understand and the son understands what's going to happen. Because some of the kids don't know about basis of property. So the carryover is what we call gifting. The step up in basis is what we call dying and stepped up in value. Okay?
Does it matter if you bequeath to immediate family or distant family as far as tax treatment?
No. See, Montana does not have an inheritance tax. And the only difference might be this. If you own land in another state, okay, that state says, hey, we have a right to have a tax when it goes to your relatives. That's only if you have land in another state. If you have checking accounts, savings accounts, etc., but they're located in another state, but you're a Montanan, they go by Montana law. So there would be no inheritance tax if they inherit your CD and they happen to live in a state that has an inheritance tax.
Okay, so there's no difference whether you bequeath that to a son or daughter versus a third cousin.
Right. You may have this third cousin that even, or one of your kids. Thank you for following up, Emily. I forgot the question by the time I got there. Yappity yap. Okay. That relative that you have that lives in New York, you can leave it to him whenever you want to. Your Montana property.
Okay. Another question. So can you explain a little bit how that federal gift tax adds up? Does it add up? So in your example of giving me $100,000, which wouldn't that be nice if we had that kind of money?
Yeah.
And that amount, the $85,000 above the $15,000 limit, what happens with that $85,000? Are you taxed on it immediately? Does it add up at the end? How does that work?
Okay, very good question, because it was kind of hard to understand. I used to think if you gave a gift like that and you figured up the tax, so that's what happens. You've got the 709 return, and on that return they're going to show how much the exemption of $15,000 of that $100,000 I gave Emily. So that leaves me, quotes, $85,000 that's going to be taxed. So what they'll do is go to the tax tables for gifting and say, what is the tax on that $85,000? I don't know what it is, but we're going to pretend it's $5,000. Okay, so they'll put the $5,000 down, and what that is done, what happens is it's subtracted from a credit that you have. And there's no need for you to know the credit type thing because it's on the form. But that means I don't write out a check for that $5,000. What I will do is subtract it from my exemption, and that means I have X amount left for gifting or dying. Because what I forgot to mention is this $11,580,000 is unified. You can either gift it or you can die. And you've got that one lump pot there. And if you start using it for gifting, like if you gave away, if I gave you, Emily, $5,580,000, I wouldn't have anything left for when I die. I wouldn't have a credit there. So it's unified. So if you're in that situation, you'd probably want to take a look at both our mock guides, one on gifting and the other one that is on the federal estate tax. And for those of you that are concerned about nursing home care, we've got one on the long-term care partnership program and another one on Medicaid for long-term care. So check those out with your county extension agent or download them from the site because I think we've got those resources there for you.
Yes, we do. So that brings up a good point. So this webinar is going to be recorded. I mean, it is being recorded right now, and it will be posted on the Tuesday Tips website. You can just type in Montana State University Tuesday Tips, and it'll take you right there. I'm also posting in the chat for you to see the link to the resources from this week, which have, I believe, both of the Mont guides that Marcia just mentioned, along with one about uniform transfers to minors. So that information is there as well. Last week, the Trusts 101 recording, we're still working on that. It's saved in a different format, so we have to do some technical things, but that recording will be posted soon as well. So feel free to share that information with anybody who wasn't able to make it, or if you would like to go back and review those past recordings are available online as well, and you can find them on the Tuesday Tips website. I don't see any more questions that have come up, Marcia, unless somebody's got a last-minute one. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we sign off?
Yeah, just once again, thank you for participating, and we hope we see you next week when we'll be talking about those financial and healthcare powers of attorney. I think you'll find that one very useful for your own personal situation. See you next week.